Phoena's Quest, Book 1, First Spark, by Chrissy Garwood. Chapter 9, Lost in the River. Water surrounded her, above and below. Phoena held her breath and rested. In the stillness, a memory from her childhood awakened. It had happened in her first year in the academy kitchens. She could have been no older than 4, still oblivious to her peril. The older children from the kitchen were chasing her. This was not unusual. She was already an expert at hiding. Soon they would grow tired of searching for her. But that fateful day she had been too slow. Her escape into the back garden had ended with her capture. From her tormentor's lips spewed hate-filled words of prejudice. She maintained her silence. There were no answers to their accusations. Experience had taught her that pleading for mercy only made things worse. The children dragged her towards the pond, which was shielded from the kitchen. On the previous day, the cook had drowned a litter of unwanted kittens there. Her child's mind accepted their reasoning. Phoena hadn't struggled when they pushed her under the water. A strange hush fell on the group, while the bubbles of air gurgled from her mouth and nose. She had kept her eyes open, memorizing their faces. When her vision blurred, the forbidden prayer had awoken within her. It sang with a loud voice, chasing away all thought except surrender. The darkness had claimed her. But she hadn't drowned. It seemed but a heartbeat later she was no longer a victim to those cruel hands. Instead, the warm sun was shining on her face. Her clothes and hair were dripping wet. Phoena stood alone in a forbidden garden beside a river. She was almost dry by the time she found her way back to the servants' entrance. Her return to the kitchen had been greeted by a severe scolding from the adults. But the other children had never confessed their part in her drenching. They left her alone after that. Phoena forced her mind from the memories as she floated beneath the cold water. The current flowed faster here, drawing her along. She let some of the air in her lungs escape in a stream of bubbles. Those glistening orbs rose upward. She reached out her hand. A swirling brightness near her fingertips brought her comfort. "Thank you," Phoena silently prayed. "I don't want to die alone in the darkness." A shock ripped through her body. If she was here alone, where were the 3 noblemen who had been in the dark cavern? They had said they needed her to guide them to freedom. Were they lost in the underground tunnels without hope of rescue? Desperately she recalled their images. Dark-haired Lord Carillion, so full of self-assurance. Viscount Barapa, small and brown, stubborn and reckless. And the dragon, Lord Horomus. "I didn't mean to abandon them to the darkness," her mind cried. "Please save them." Above her a blinding light banished the darkness. She used the last of her strength to push herself upwards. Her head burst through the surface of the water. Phoena spluttered, gasping for air. A shadowy form descended over her. Fierce talons plucked Phoena from the water. The black dragon delivered her to the bank and dropped her beside the underground river. Phoena rolled onto her side, coughing up water. She then lay still, with her eyes closed. "Barapa, this is your fault. You should be careful not to put ideas in her head," Carillion muttered. "We almost drowned when she transported us into the river. I only wanted her to drown him. Be thankful that she didn't. Without his ability to fly," Carillion said, "we wouldn't have been able to rescue her. The current is too strong here, and she was too far from the bank." "Is she dead?" Barapa asked. "Of course not." "Why was she suspended under the water?" "I don't know. Perhaps she doesn't know how to swim." Oramus joined the conversation. "Or perhaps she wanted to put as much distance between us as possible." Phoena opened her eyes. The three noblemen crouched in a semicircle 3 paces away from her. The familiar illuminating orb hovered above her head. That explained the brightness, but there was no accompanying warmth. She shivered. The 3 men were in a pitiful state. Puddles of water pooled beneath their sodden boots. "I've gathered some driftwood," Lord Oramus said, "but I'm too cold to make flames. If we don't want to freeze to death, we'll have to persuade her to make fire." "How do you propose we do that?" Lord Carilion asked. "I don't want to do anything to alarm her. When you suggested Barapa should kiss her, she looked as surprised as the rest of us when the portal opened." "Don't talk about me as if I'm not here." Phoena pulled herself upright. She arranged her damp skirts as the 3 noblemen rose to their feet. "You could try asking her," Barapa said. The others didn't respond. Barapa took a deep breath and stepped closer. When he held out his hand, Phoena accepted it in her own. He bowed his head for a moment. "Dear lady," he began, we, your humble and devoted servants, wish to apologise. To apologise for the shameful way we have behaved towards you. We deserve to be almost drowned." "Hey!" Carilion said, shoving him aside. "Don't overstep your authority." He snatched Phoena's hand from Barapa. "What he's trying to say is we want to declare a truce. We'll forget about the wager and no longer make sport at your expense. In return, you'll answer our questions so that we can find out how you activate your power." "Enough talking," Oramus muttered. "I'm sorry, your ladyship, but I'm too cold for niceties." He pointed at the mountain of driftwood behind him. "Light the fire." The glowing orb rose to illuminate the whole area. This was a different cavern. The ceiling was only half as high here. They were marooned on a ledge beside the underground river. Far away, Phoena could make out where the torrent came through a dark tunnel, while in the opposite direction it raced away into the gloom. While she puzzled over how to proceed, her mind whispered a prayer for guidance. She circled the driftwood, waiting for inspiration. The 3 noblemen walked a few steps behind her. Phoena rubbed her hands to warm them. Her eyes kept wandering to the glowing light above her. She shivered again and then stopped. "Lord Carilion, is that an illumination spell, or do you use your own magic to make it work?" "It's my own magic," he replied, and he waved his hand. The glowing orb danced in response. "He's always boasting about how easy it is," Barapa added. "He says even the children at home can do it." "So, if I have any power," Phoena said, "I should be able to work out how to do this?" "It would be easier than making fire," Carilion said. "Oramus seems certain that you can do that. Here, take my light and see what you can do with it." The light source dropped onto Carilion's palm, and he held it towards her. Cautiously, Phoena touched it with her fingers. She prayed silently that something would happen. The orb flashed brighter as she pressed her hand to the surface. She frowned and focused all her attention on willing something to happen. The glowing ball throbbed and vibrated under her hand. It seemed to be getting warmer. A few moments later the orb exploded with a loud bang. Carilion swore as he pulled back his hand. All that remained of the orb was a glowing spiral of sparks which fizzed and faded. The heavy darkness pressed in upon them. A string of curses disrupted the ensuing silence. Carilion cried, "What did you do to my light?" Phoena bit her lip. "Make another one, Carillion," Barappa said. "You're always boasting about how easy these simple tricks are. What's taking you so long?" "I told you her defences push back," Carillion complained. "My ears are ringing, and I'm tingling all over, and my fingers won't work. It feels as if I've been struck by lightning." Phoena turned in the direction of his voice and tried to find him in the darkness. "Give me your hand, Carillion." "Why would I do that? You'll only blast me again." "Just do as she says," groaned Horamus, "and stop complaining." When Phoena felt a groping hand brush against her arm, she seized it. "I'll try again." She closed her eyes. She brought up the memory of the warmth she had felt moments before the orb exploded. The image turned within her mind. She thought about the heat of the sun on her face, on those rare occasions when she had walked in the garden. 1,000 invisible needles pierced her fingers. Heat ran up and down her arm. Carillion screamed and threw himself backwards, breaking her hold. The ground beneath her feet rumbled, and she fell to her knees. "Woohoo!" Barappa shouted. "Now that's what I call a light. Hey, open your eyes, see what you've done!" Phoena blinked in surprise. She shielded her face with one hand and stared at the ceiling. A miniature golden sun was spinning in place above them. Was she responsible for this marvel? The cabin was bright with warm light. The damp misery in her soul began to shift. "I'm still cold," Horamus muttered. "You've proven you can manipulate magic, so light the fire." "Give me your hand." Carillion still knelt on the ground. "I'd be careful if I were you. She only sent a blast of energy through me, but she could set you on fire." "Thanks for the warning. I still have enough power to shapeshift." The air around Horamus wavered, and then his body began to shrink. A few moments later, a tiny reddish-black dragonette was hovering before her. Phoena held out her hand. He settled on her wrist, coiling his tail around her arm. The dragonette turned his head towards the unlit bonfire. Again she closed her eyes. This time she imagined the tiny orange flames that revealed the dragon's presence in the garden. All she needed was a spark. She took a deep breath and concentrated. "Please let this work. Please let this work," she whispered. The air seemed to crackle with energy, and her hand became painfully hot. Whoosh! Phoena fell backwards to the ground. When she looked again, the driftwood was ablaze with an unnatural intensity. She watched the sparks exploding upward as the timber burned. The dragonette nuzzled her cheek before lifting into the air. He dived into the crackling flames. "He's safe now," she thought. She shuddered as the realization of what she had done hit her with full force. Turning from the fire, Phoena tried to process the revelation. At first she was numb all over. Then a pain erupted in her chest. Perhaps her heart was being torn apart. Her body flashed hot, then cold, then hot again. All her muscles tensed, and she was almost sick. Her head began to spin. The dizziness dropped her to the ground. "Are you okay?" Barappa bent down beside her. "I need a few moments to recover. You go to the fire and dry yourself, my lord." His feet shuffled away. It was a relief to be alone. Unfamiliar images flooded her mind as her thoughts turned inward. Were these forgotten memories? The images flashed too fast for her to comprehend them. There were unfamiliar faces. Her emotional response was overwhelming. Some faces filled her with joy, while others inspired horror and despair. A vast treasury of emotions unlocked within her. She remained silent, not wanting to draw attention to herself. The visions intensified until she lost her connection with the real world. A younger version of Lord Westonbrook appeared among these memories. He picked her up with his massive hands and placed her in an impossibly small box. The lid closed. She was alone in the darkness. Phoena screamed, but no sound reached her ears. She tried to force her way out of the box. The harder she pushed, the more constrictive the barrier. There were flashes of light, sparks flashed and whizzed in the confined space. It seemed that she was in the box for an eternity. The magical sparks grew dimmer and dimmer until she had no power left. A fierce pain stabbed her chest. Phoena fell forward. Her breathing came in ragged gasps. Barappa shouted in alarm. He called for Carillion. Together they helped her to the fire. "You'll feel better when your clothes are dry," Carillion said. The two men held her upright until she was certain she could stand by herself. They withdrew but stayed close. The steam began to rise from her clothes. From time to time she turned around until her garments were completely dry. The bonfire died down to half its height. A sudden flash of movement signalled the dragonette's awakening. He rose from the glowing coals and spiralled around the artificial sun. He seemed to be increasing in size, with red streaks among his black fur. When the dragon towered over them, he flew towards the river. The dragon returned carrying more dripping driftwood. He dropped this into the flames. There was a hiss, followed by a sizzling explosion. This was no ordinary fire. The two noblemen retreated. The dragon dipped his wings and flew away again. Phoena stepped to the river bank to watch the dragon's flight. Her two companions murmured behind her. "What would happen if she tried to use her magic while she's holding your hand, Barappa?" Lord Carillion asked. "As you so often remind me, I don't have any magic." The dragon returned with more timber. Phoena watched him drop the timber onto the flames. She shielded her eyes from the sparks. "I don't think that matters. I'm almost certain she only used Aramis and I to focus her mind." "Ah," Barappa said, "that's logical. She copied your magic light and replicated his dragon fire. What do you propose she might gain from me?" "You're good with words. Let's see what she can do with that." The dragon returned, delivered the final load, and then dipped out of view on the other side of the fire. Phoena refocused on the others. "What would I talk about?" Barappa asked. "I remember your boast about your name day celebration. I'm hungry. Let's see if she can conjure us a feast." "Why do you think I can do that?" Phoena asked. "You still doubt yourself. It can't hurt to see what else you can do. Can we wait until Aramis joins us? If something goes wrong, I don't want to lose anyone." "If what goes wrong?" Aramis asked as he appeared beside Barappa. "Carillion wants her to try her magic on me and conjure us a feast. An excellent idea. A good bonfire always makes me hungry. I almost swept down and gobbled the three of you up, but then I remembered I need her to get me out of here." "You promised not to tease her," Barappa warned him. "Carillion promised, not me. If you remember, I told her what I needed and she did it. She doesn't want to lose any of us, so what is there for me to fear?" "This," said Phoena without thinking. With a flick of her wrist, she drew a wave from the river. Water splashed over him. He jumped back. Her mouth opened in horror. "Quick!" shouted Barappa. The three noblemen threw themselves at Phoena. They knocked her to the ground, creating an untidy stack of bodies. They held their positions for longer than she believed necessary. When they finally released her, Phoena brushed the dirt from her skirt. She glowered at them, but maintained her silence. "Progress," Lord Aramis said. His grin was contagious. "Lady, Words cannot express my gratitude that you didn't transport us somewhere else. You must be getting used to our disreputable company. Now, let's get on with this plan to create a feast. My lords, I have a few questions first. You threw yourself at me because you feared I was going to leave without you. They all nodded. Lord Carillion and Viscount Barapa were holding me when I disappeared last time. Why weren't they beside me when I awoke in the river? Lady, if you must insist on formality, Carillion said with a bow, I request your permission to answer that question. Don't call me lady. My name is Phoena. The words hung in the air. She had never spoken that name out loud before. At last, Carillion laughed. I have your name. For a moment he looked as if he had forgotten the wager was off. Aramis punched his arm. Carillion rubbed the injured limb and then shrugged. Phoena, that's a delightful name for a fire-adept enchantress. If I'm permitted to call you by name, then you must drop the formalities. Address me as Carillion. I'm sure Barapa won't mind what you call him. I'll leave our esteemed Dragon Lord to speak for himself. Lady Phoena, Aramis said, bowing low. Lady, must I remind you that I am the first of our company to make your acquaintance? Indeed, I am heartbroken. Nay, I am deeply offended. You didn't notice my talons attached to your shoulder when you last disappeared. To show that you repent of this oversight, please address me as Aramis. He bowed again. Something fizzed inside Phoena. A spark of joy leapt into existence. She choked back a giggle and dropped into a curtsy. Are you mocking me? Aramis asked, his eyes twinkling. You forget that I'm a terrible tease. He moved closer. Phoena danced out of his reach, giddy with unfamiliar happiness. She lifted her skirts and leapt over the smouldering fire. You have to catch me first. She led Aramis a merry chase. Phoena wasn't sure if he was letting her win, or whether there was something inexplicable about the way she eluded him. Finally he paused beside the fire, out of breath. Dear listening reader, I hope you have enjoyed this latest chapter from the first book in the Phoena's Quest trilogy. This is a beta copy, and the text may change between now and the official publication date. If you have any questions or suggestions that would make this chapter easier to read, please let me know. In return for your help, I will include your name in the acknowledgements as part of the reader team. Chrissy.